Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. So Kyle Rittenhouse has decided he's not voting for Donald Trump, and a lot of people are super angry about it. It turns out that we're just one more released felon away from winning the entire black vote, so it's important to go after Kamala Harris for imposing some form of law and order. And as you guys have probably seen from the Olympics, we're now just beating women. Biological men are beating women bloody in front of giant crowds after a satanic opening ritual. And, you know, it's really just August, so things can only get better from here. Joining me to talk about all this is Nate Hochman. He's a senior advisor over at American 2100. Thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Good to be back.
Absolutely. So I guess we can just start off with a little bit of the Olympic stuff. I'm sure you saw the opening ceremony, or at least the snippets that were going around everywhere. Not a great start for the 2024 Paris Games, but looming behind this story was kind of building up before the actual fights even took place, was the fact that there were multiple female boxers that were going to be competing who had been previously disqualified due to their testing as biological males. They were disqualified from the 2023 Women's World Championships of Boxing, and I guess they that's the standard there. Now, in the Olympics, they have their own thing where basically they let each sport decide what their policy is going to be in that competition. You would think you'd want the one for the physical combat sport to be the most stringent, but apparently that's not the case. Can you fill people a little bit in if they haven't seen kind of what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just sort of ridiculous, even at a zoomed out level. We're at the point where like conservatives are defending women's combat sports. Like I think you retweeted this today. So I think I saw it on your feed where it's like, normie conservatives are like, in my America, only biological women will be beating up other biological women.
Yeah, crush the orbital socket of my daughter. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. Which is like, do I have to defend this? But obviously at a level you do, because it's an assault on the gender binary. It's an assault on, the very basic biological distinctions that make us who we are. So at a certain level, we have no choice but to defend women's combat sports. The case with, you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, the case with the boxer, and I honestly, I think the correct pronouns are he in this case, because it is a biological male, but it's a little more complicated than like a normal cut and dry, like this person was born an unambiguous man, they went through a gender transition, they became a woman. It's difficult. Like the problem is traditionally you have media and journalists who you would go to sort of explain this to you. And they're also ideologically committed to total obfuscation that they're completely useless, if not worse than useless. So I think my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is an intersex person who is born with versions of both male and female genitalia, but had male chromosomes. So for all intents and purposes is a biological male. And you almost don't need to get into the details, because if you look, it's like I know it when I see a situation where if you look at them boxing an actual woman, it's very clear that this is somebody who is mostly, if not 100% male. And it's obvious to anyone who can see it. Like you don't actually need to explain it or unpack it further than that.
Yeah, like you said, it's very frustrating because the media's desire to obfuscate the reality here made it very difficult, because the boxer who I'm gonna get the name wrong as well as everything else, but it's Imane Khelif from Algeria, however that's properly pronounced, and the boxer squared off against Angela Carini from Italy. And like you said, the contrast was so stark, it was ridiculous. The Algerian boxer is just hulking over this woman. She quit 46 seconds into the fight, got punched in the face once, and said, done. There's no way I'm doing this. You could see the blood pouring out of her face already. It was very clear the mismatch here. And like I said, it's hard to tell exactly what the biological condition surrounding this is. It's not the standard. It's not just a transvestite. It's not just somebody who decided, to go through the surgeries or take the treatments or someone. It is someone with a biological condition, at least as far as we know. It may not be the case. Again, it's just very difficult through the reporting to actually get real information. The point is, either way, this person did fail a test as a biological male. That much we know for sure. It's XY chromosome. This person is the beneficiary of a male physiology, at least to a certain degree. And when you're in that scenario, look, morally, just talking about, mental health and other scenarios, a person who is born into a situation like this, they haven't done anything wrong, right? This is just something they didn't make a choice here. They didn't have some kind of mental crisis and decide to make terrible decisions or, get bad medical advice about what to do to their bodies in order to fix this. This is somebody who's born into a condition like that. So you understand, like, that in itself is not a problem. However, when we're talking about women's sports or any kind of sports, especially at an Olympic level, you're going to be talking about the tails in the distribution, right? You're not talking about the average person. And so having these extreme benefits because you have a certain percentage of male advantage is going to be huge. And when you have this scenario where you are born with this, even though it's not a choice that you made, there should still be probably an understanding that obviously you then have to make a decision on kind of which of the genders you're going to live as, which one you're going to go ahead and align with. But you probably shouldn't be involved in combat sports. Maybe archery, maybe a little bit of curling, something like this. But when it's literally coming to combat, when it's about beating someone in the face, if you were born a male, even if there are medical complications that leave you in a situation where perhaps you do actually need to go ahead and present yourself as a female because of medical complications, you should not be in the business of beating someone live on television who is biologically female.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, like, since the transgender debate kind of exploded on the scene, I mean, in really 5-6 years ago, one of the red herrings the left would always throw out would be like intersex people. Like, this was one of the first that I can think of prominent examples of this, infinitesimally small 0.00, however many 0.1% of the population demographics that doesn't fit perfectly into the gender binary. And the left used that tiny demographic basically as the ideological premise, or one of their ideological premises for deconstructing the entire gender binary. Like, look at this tiny group of people, see the gender binary doesn't exist. But to your point, like, they do have a male chromosome. And even like the unfortunate thing about being a conservative, or at least a conservative who is like in politics and is making arguments, is by the time you're already making this argument, you kind of already lost, right?
Right.
Like, it should be obvious to anybody at a pre-rational, pre-ideological level when you see a guy who looks like a guy punching a woman in the face for sport as the crowd cheers, that this is obviously wrong, right? Like, the correct state of affairs in a healthy society is one in which you don't have to formulate ideological arguments for why that's wrong. Everyone just gets it, right? It is like an I know it when I see it type of situation. And, the left does all these kind of clever two steps in the way they make these arguments. Like, I saw a bunch of lefty journalists over the last 48 hours arguing on Twitter. If you make it about a bone density or testosterone concentration or XYZ, like, X woman who's a kind of genetic freak of nature would actually be disqualified as well. Because it's true, like, if you make it to the Olympics in a lot of sports, male or female, you are a genetic freak in all kinds of ways, right?
Right.
The women, like Simone Biles, has exceptionally high testosterone concentration for a woman, right? She's still a woman. Everyone gets that she's a woman. So the left, in like a weird, contorted way, kind of has a point where if we're trying to argue against this on the basis of testosterone concentration or bone density or all these things, like, we will lose because there are all kinds of exceptions to that rule. The best way to argue against it is, again, at like a pre-ideological level, that's wrong. Everyone knows that's wrong. But unfortunately, because the left is quite effective at advancing their cultural causes, we have moved past that point already. And we have to come up with arguments for why this obviously wrong thing is obviously wrong.
Yeah, this is the Nick Land, to have this debate is to lose it. This public integrative debate is to immediately abandon the axiom that men and women are radically different, and therefore it's obvious, because the things that make us men and women are physical, but they're also spiritual, they're also psychological, they are sociological, they have several different components. And the hyper rational desire to go ahead and parse every one of these individual things out will eventually, like you said, go ahead and produce the scenario where you're picking through each part of the ideological assembly, saying, "Oh well, no, because athletes and female sports in this area have this particular thing, therefore you're just going to disqualify everyone." Or, well, the purpose of marriage isn't having kids because sometimes people don't have children when they're married.
Right.
Like by picking out those outliers, by arguing each one of those things, you go ahead and disassemble something that is otherwise obvious, and that is so often the mistake that people on the right make. But I think it's important that this story is important for many different reasons. Like, we got here for a reason. A lot of people who are outraged about this are people who were ideological leftists, people who are, kind of the "I didn't leave the left left me" types, the IDW rational centrist types. And they're like, "Oh, how could we possibly, be in this point where men are beating women up for sport on live television?" And the answer is because you did this, because you brought us here. Even conservatives, I think, in a big way, were involved with this. But let me bring up J.K. Rowling's point here. She put out this tweet and said, "Could any picture sum up our new men's rights movement better?" Yes, men's right activists did this. It's all the MRAs, those online MRAs. They're the ones who did this. "The smirk of a male who knows he's protected by a misogynist sporting establishment."
God.
Yes, the Olympics, known for their outright misogyny, enjoying the distress of a woman he's punched in the head and whose life's ambition he's just shattered. So J.K. Rowling occasionally comes out and says something moderately based when it comes to the trans issue, right? Somebody who has garnered a lot of fire for being particularly loud on this issue and only this issue. However, every time she does this, conservatives run and flock and say, "Oh, Rowling's so based, one of us, only a matter of time, you're a right-winger now, blah, blah, blah." But then whenever someone I've seen Matt Walsh reply to her, she gets really angry. It's like, "Oh no, I'm not one of you. I'm not, I'm not one of you deplorables, untouchables, the chuds. I'm not, I just have this one issue. I'm just a rad femme. Otherwise, I'm a total lib." It's this constant framing of, "Oh well, I'm against this, but only because ultimately I'm really a feminist. I'm really against misogyny. That's the only reason I can find to actually oppose what's happening here. It's not the problem that I've been deconstructing gender archetypes for decades. It's not that we've been under this societal revolution that's completely destroyed how we structure everything about male and female relationships. That's not the problem. It's just this moment right now, when a woman is finally being pummeled in the face by a biological man, that I finally know, oh, maybe there's an issue. Well, it's probably still the men's fault."
Yeah, dude, I hadn't seen that post. I just, in my ripe old age of 26, I'm already exhausted. I don't even know what it's going to be like when I'm 36. This stuff, the right is, there's a reason that the right's called the stupid party and the left's called the evil party, right? It's a cliche, but you see stuff like this and you can't miss why it's true, because it's the depressing thing is not that you have this ex-lib who's moderately good on trans issues who still is a liberal. The depressing thing is conservatives love it, right?
Yes.
This is the exact same thing. I've been on a jihad against this particular talking point for the last month. This is the exact same thing as the Democrats are the real racists trope that everyone's familiar with, who watches your show at least, which is conservatives have internalized to such a substantial extent their enemies' core ideological premises that they cannot help but make arguments against their enemies on the grounds that their enemies established, right? So you have this with all of the arguments on race against the Democrats, right? The Democrats are the KKK, the Democrats are the real racists, right? Some guy reposted this video from some black Republican the other day defending gun rights, and it was the black Republican with an AK-47 as these Democrats in Ku Klux Klan hoods, crept up, into his backyard, and everyone's like, "That's awesome." It's because he's exposing who Democrats really are. It's yeah, Democrats are putting on Klan hoods and like, hunting black men for sport in the year of our Lord 2024. It's that little stuff, but it's indicative of these deeper pathologies in the conservative political imagination, where they fundamentally see the world through liberal premises, because unbeknownst to most of them, I think, and a lot of them are probably doing it in good faith, some of them aren't, they are also governed by the same liberal narrative hegemony as a result of the total state that you wrote about in your new book, as everyone else is. Very few people are actually intellectually independent enough and ideologically independent enough to understand the fact that there is an alternative to liberal political premises. So when we're arguing against transgenderism, it's because transgenderism is misogynistic. It's a men's rights movement, right? When we're arguing against Democrat policies, it's because the real problem is they're racist to black people, right? Like that's the real problem with the Democratic Party. It's like little stuff, right? At the RNC, they had this, on the first night, which was the worst night, they had this woman with a heavy accent from, I think, Venezuela, arguing against illegal immigration because the number one victim of illegal immigration is legal immigrants, right? And it's like, it's just, conservatives are incapable of taking their own side on every single issue. And ultimately, like, you can go down the line, but that's why they've lost every culture war issue of importance, maybe with the exception briefly of abortion. That's controversial, since the 1960s, since the launch or the creation of the modern culture war, because they are not actually culturally right-wing themselves, even if they think they are.
Yeah, and again, we see this because they've been so terrified to defend any of this stuff, or fight back against any of this stuff until it really hit this point. Conservatives totally abandoned the idea that men and women were different until it came to them beating each other in the face. They totally abandoned the idea that men should have men's only spaces and the women should have women's only spaces, until it literally ended up with creepers in their kids' locker rooms. They abandoned all of these things that were fundamental building blocks of society for thousands of years. The way that everyone had lived their lives for a very long time and were critical to social organizations. Conservatives were unwilling to conserve any of that stuff until we end up in a scenario where a woman is literally getting beaten within an inch of her life on television for everyone's amusement, or some pervert is wandering into your 13-year-old's locker room to leer around while pretending to wear a wig. These are the only things that trigger that. And the fact that conservatives were so unwilling, the right was so unwilling to stand up and say, no, actually, these things are different. Gender roles have existed for a very long time. They don't just exist to keep men from beating up women in a boxing ring, or to keep men from wandering in and staring at a woman in a changing room. They exist for many reasons, to protect men and women, to allow society to function. And maybe we shouldn't just wait to talk about the deconstruction of those things until they end up with a woman bloody on the mat on an Olympic ring.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And every step of the way as the left kind of successively made their way through every last remaining cultural, the hangover of the old cultural distinctions, conservatives made their arguments with some notable exceptions. I think, the religious right doesn't get enough credit for you've talked about this before, I think, being right about a lot of stuff that nobody gave them credit for at the time. And they were marginalized and treated as kooks by the conservative establishment for the most part. But conservatives, every step of the way, made these narrow, tailored arguments against the particular policy on the grounds of that particular policy, right? And they tried to formulate, like, social conservatives during the marriage fight, I think honorably and nobly. There are some smart people who are trying hard to make this argument. They made the argument against marriage, or they tried to make the argument against gay marriage on the grounds of children's rights, right? Children have a right to a mother and a father. It's not the worst framing when we're talking about these issues. Like, it's true, right? Like, if you're talking about concern for children, you are, obviously children do better under a mother and a father, and there's all kinds of social science they mustered to show that. But ultimately, it's still a retreat from the idea that there's a natural moral order, and that society's structure should reflect that natural moral order. And if you're appealing to, like, liberal rights, even if it's totally legitimate appeals, you're already internalizing all kinds of liberal premises, and you're never going to beat the left at rights talk, right? Because the left is always, the left is the party of infinite, never increasing rights. So once conservatives have lost the battle on the actual moral order question, which ultimately is what all of this comes down to, they have lost. And then it's, I mean, you see this time and time again, it's only a matter of time until they lose in the material political sphere as well.
No, we're the real civil rights revolution, Nate.
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
understand. Yeah. No, I don't know if you ever saw that video going around. I think Logan Hall actually had it posted at one point, but it was Alan Keyes and Obama debating gay marriage, and Alan Keyes just makes this natural law argument that wrecks Obama. Just runs, laps around Obama, but the whole point is like, and then Obama became president. Like Alan Keyes could make the best, most logical, philosophically grounded argument, can utterly embarrass this man intellectually on live television, and nobody cares. Like nobody cares.
Yeah.
So for those thinking that you're just gonna, deftly outmaneuver your opponent, I saw a lot of people getting very angry at Donald Trump, and this will kind of move into our discussion here a little later about your piece recently. But they got very angry at Donald Trump because he questioned whether or not Kamala Harris was black, right? When he was at this event talking to black reporters, and they're like, "No, you have to stick to the substance." Ben Shapiro was on there. We need the facts, we need the logic, we need the arguments. Like, no, that's is it your first time watching a political contest? Like, one day we're going to get this message through, I guess, but I guess ironically we'll make the argument that the arguments are not the key, but at some point it has to sink into the conservative mind that, like, obviously you want to be able to make the arguments, you want to have that intellectual background. If you need to go, the whole 9 innings, you should be able to do it. But that is ultimately not what drives any of this. It's not what drives politics. It's not what drives public opinion. It's not what drives culture. Like arguments matter, rationality matters. But at some point, conservatives were told that they lost because they were stupid. And since then, they've never recovered from that. They were told that they just couldn't. You're the big dumb jock. You're never going to be able to handle it. You let the experts, let the smart people handle this stuff. And ever since then, they've been trying to, shove the glasses up and get the pocket protector ready and say, okay, we're going to dominate debate club. And meanwhile, Democrats haven't even touched that. They don't even care. The arguments don't matter. And they keep wrecking you because they understand that actually emotions, identity, these are the things that actually frame the majority of political and cultural contests.
No, 100%. I mean, I always have to remind myself, and I don't always do a good job of like really internalizing it, that as a sort of, political addict, guy who works in politics full time, the average voter spends probably 5 minutes a day on average, max, maybe, thinking about politics, and has the accumulated political knowledge of somebody who spends about 5 minutes a day thinking about politics, right? And especially in a mass democracy, which is, the political system we have now, the way that winning coalitions are put together, that power is wielded, that, elections are won, etc., is vibes, for lack of a better word, right? Like vibes. The old beer test, which now is like, misogynistic and sexist because it's male coded, but is obviously true of like the politician that you'd rather have a beer with is generally the politician who wins, has more explanatory power for elections than like the most advanced, sophisticated political science models known to man, right? Like there are policy issues that matter, that some voters care about, especially when they affect their lives in a material way. There are some arguments that can be persuasive, but conservatives wildly overestimate, the level to which that is what wins or loses elections. He made a better argument. He had a better policy pitch. It's mostly vibes most of the time, right? And, Trump, people, in the attempt to sort of construct an intellectual Trumpism, which I'm sympathetic to in all kinds of ways, people overestimated the level of vibes with him as well. He was running on real issues that Republican voters cared about. It was true that the reason that he kind of circumvented the entire Republican establishment is because they had nothing but contempt for their base for decades, particularly on the issue of immigration. And that he tapped into an issue like trade, which probably won him the blue ball states. But a huge part of it, like it couldn't be just anyone running on that agenda on, immigration restriction, negotiating better trade deals, et cetera. It had to be Donald Trump running on that agenda. because it was a vision, it was a message, it was a feeling, it was a sensation that he was tapping into. But the average voter is a bundle of this, complex, inextricable cohort of emotions and anger and resentment and fears and ambitions and dreams and like all of these different things that normal people feel that makes them a human being. And like 5% of that is their answer to any sort of policy question on a public opinion poll. You can't really understand voters by just viewing them as like the sum total of their answers to like, what do you think of abortion? What do you think of abortable, et cetera, right? That's not how they work. And that's why, the pro-lifers for a long time have pushed all these polls showing that like overwhelming majorities of Americans support restrictions on XYZ kind of abortion procedure. And all of these abortion bills are going down in flames in like deep red states when they get put to a vote, because even though those voters are ostensibly pro-life, they don't like the idea of an abortion restriction on a vibes level. And I think pro-lifers don't understand that. But to be fair to pro-lifers, like I don't think most of the conservative movement understands that either.
Yeah, I had this conversation many, many times with guys from the DeSantis camp. No offense here, but I had this conversation. Totally. I had this conversation a million times where they're like, no, but don't you understand DeSantis is better on the issues? Yes. Don't you understand that DeSantis is a better executive? Yes. Then why are you saying Trump's going to win? Because it's not about those things. It has nothing to do with those things. Yes, in a laboratory, DeSantis is a wildly better candidate in every way. Can't argue that at all. But you have to be blind to not see the storyline, the narrative, the movement behind Donald Trump. Whether you think him worthy of it or not, whether you believe him to be any of the things that people have entrusted him with, that's not the question. That's not the question. That's not the political question. The question is who has that zeitgeist, who has that momentum, like who has built that aura and built that following. And at the end of the day, when people walk into those voting booths, that's what they're looking at. It's not, well, I see DeSantis check 3 more boxes, or I see Kamala Harris checked these. That is not the issue at all.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say really quickly without going down a tangent on that, and without getting into the ignominious end of the campaign with, what a story for a different day. I don't want to give myself too much credit at all, obviously, but this is something that I was like screaming at the top of my lungs for months and months on the campaign was, DeSantis, like, he's on the spectrum, right? Like, let's just be honest. He was the reason he was such a great governor. Yes, is like he's probably a little autistic, right?
Yes, gets things done. The trains run on time, and I love my state. I love my state. Trains get exactly where they need to go.
But to that point, like even beyond the trains, although that's obviously important, like the reason that he did so well on COVID, when a lot of other red states didn't, like pretty early on. It's true, Florida locked down for a little bit, right? But they opened up by summer 2020. Well, this guy, this is like, based autist, to the max. He went back and basically gave himself a crash course in like February 2020 on epidemiology and like read every paper on epidemiology that had been written in the last century, read like 6 books about like the Spanish flu, right? And like studied the contrast between them and came to the conclusion independently of every single expert like power center in the country that they were all wrong, which is like about as ballsy as you could get in a situation like that, and then stuck with it, right? So what was his downfall in the campaign was he thought he could do everything himself to an extent, but that's actually what made him such a good governor. So all that is a way of saying like he did actually have a vibe that worked as governor of Florida, right? And it was like the kind of based autist, right? Like, he's awkward, but in like he's our guy kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Like, love it because he like doesn't care, right? But when you're running against Donald Trump and when you're running a national operation, just talking ad nauseum about all the things you can do, right? Like all the things you did and how good you are at doing things is not actually, how you tap into the soul that allows for the creation of a mass political movement. And I think I just don't think that he was able to sort of internalize that because it was so foreign to the way he understood how politics works, which is why he's the greatest Republican governor in the country, but it's also why he was never going to beat Donald Trump.
Right. All right, guys. Well, we're going to move on here. We've got, of course, Kyle Rittenhouse and his abandonment of Donald Trump in the current election. We also have, will the African American community suddenly abandon the Democratic Party if you just tell them that Kamala Harris is tough on crime? We'll be talking about all of that, but first, let's hear from Job Stacking. Hey guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Job Stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what Job Stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of Job Stacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But job stacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now and book a call with Rolf today. All right, so let's go ahead and hear Kyle Rittenhouse here real quick. He had a prepared statement that he ended up reading in this video.
Hi, I'm Kyle Rittenhouse, Outreach Director for Texas Gun Rights. A lot of people are upset that I said I'm going to be writing in Ron Paul for President of the United States. And that is true. I will be writing in Ron Paul. Unfortunately, Donald Trump had bad advisors making him bad on the Second Amendment, and that is my issue. If you cannot be completely uncompromisable on the Second Amendment, I will not vote for you, and I will write somebody else in. We need champions for the Second Amendment, or our rights will be eaten away and eroded each day. I support my decision, and I have no takebacks.
No takebacks.
No takesies backsies. All right, so a lot of people are very angry at Kyle Rittenhouse here. How could he, betray Trump? How could he stab him in the back? I want people to remember a few things. Now, I am obviously somebody who is a word cell. Make my living online, writing things, putting out a book or whatever, doing a show. But I am also somebody who grew up on military bases. I am somebody who has a lot of friends and a lot of family who are service members, a lot of people who are involved directly in combat. I have a really, really high degree of respect for people who have endured violent situations and come out in a brave way. Whatever people think about Kyle Rittenhouse, this guy won an appeal to heaven, right? Like, he's in this scenario where he should be dead, and instead he was able to fight off basically a crowd single-handedly, shot only the people who were trying to kill him, which is an amazing thing. That is a level. People who have never fired a gun, especially under any kind of stress, do not understand how difficult it is to do what he did. Managed to kill only pedophiles and wife beaters, right? Right. An amazing feat all by itself. And when he did that, he did something that most people are just never going to do in their lives, and that deserves a lot of respect. An incredible amount of respect, a lot more respect than I should get for tweeting stuff out somewhere, right? Like this is a guy who truly defended himself and a area important to him in a moment of extreme stress, and did so. He just did so incredibly. And the fact that people are so quick to jump on this guy is brutal. Look, he was young when this happened. If he in a more civilized age, they would have given him a fiefdom in the hand of a minor noblewoman, right? Like that's how he would have been taken care of. But instead, this guy, he's like 18, and he all of a sudden he's internet famous. He can't get a job anywhere, right? Like you're in the world where like a lot of people know who you are, but no one wants to touch you, right? A lot of people who should be backing you up are abandoning you. Maybe he speaks at a TPUSA conference every once in a while or something, but it doesn't have a real life. He doesn't have a real job. He doesn't have this transition into kind of a stable thing. And so, yeah, I can get it. Like, is he making a dumb decision here to kind of, I'm a second amendment absolutist, and so therefore I can't possibly back Donald Trump because he's not perfect on gun rights. Is that a dumb position? Yes. But ultimately you recognize that maybe this guy isn't a thought leader, and everyone who, defends the world against communists doesn't need to be a thought leader. I'm okay with guys who are really good at taking out communists and then leave the ideological stuff to other people. And that's really where Rittenhouse should have been. But because of his situation, he gets elevated into this awkward, public speaking situation, and it just gets manipulated. And so I don't understand people, like, I get not agreeing with him, but I understand people who get really angry, really offended about this. Because obviously, at the end of the day, he's a young guy who just did not, I don't think, had a normal kind of transition into adulthood, didn't learn some important lessons, and probably wasn't ready to be like a thought leader in the conservative movement. He's just a guy who was really brave and did something brave and should be praised for that.
No, I totally agree. The problem with the conservative movement's decision, or at least some people in the conservative movement's decision to elevate him, is that it does create this dynamic where whatever he says gets scrutinized. He says something that, maybe was dumb or whatever, and people get really mad at him, which isn't fair to him. It wasn't fair to him. I'm sure he thought it was great at the time, but as a young guy, it wasn't fair to him that powerful people in the conservative movement decided to make him a public figure. The thing you were saying in the earlier part of that, I actually at the time, like during the Rittenhouse debacle, I wrote a column or an essay about this for National Review, and they got spiked because they said it was too extreme. But the
National Review.
I know, like the bastion of right wing extremism.
Yeah.
But so, like, obviously, we don't live in a republic anymore, and for all intents and purposes, we don't have a people that are capable of sustaining a republic anymore. But there are, and this is like where I'm, I guess, a little more optimistic about America or Americans, at least in pockets of the country, than some people on the right. There are parts of the country where a degree of those old small r Republican virtues still exist. And Republican virtues, it's not virtue in like the moralistic purity sense. It's virtue in the sense of self-reliance, independence from any being reliant on anybody else, being able to fend for yourself, defend yourself, a degree of courage, right? Being morally upright in the way that you conduct yourself, all of those things. Like, that was the kind of classical Republican citizen. And Rittenhouse and the other people who were with him were actually an example of that to an extent, where they took it upon themselves. Like, they were going into this community because the cops had totally abandoned it and were like scrubbing graffiti, off of businesses, and had taken it upon themselves at great personal risk, clearly, and also, universal condemnation from the media and the state, et cetera, to defend this place that was their community or was adjacent to their community when the state had totally abandoned it. Like, that actually is like a small flicker of the old American character. It's right. Like it used to be that it would be expected that that was something you do. If people start rioting in your community, Americans get some people together, local militia, they get some guns and they go out and defend their community. They don't need to wait for the cops to come. They don't need to wait for the state to tell them whether it's okay. It's their community. They have the capacity to defend it and the courage to defend it, and they go do it, right? So, like, in that sense, like, Rittenhouse, outside of the ideological stuff, like the group of people he came from and the impulse that they demonstrated is like this quintessentially American virtue that should be celebrated to a great extent. It shows that at least a small number of like the old small r Republican antibodies to total tyranny still exist. You have to push pretty far before you get, you activate them. Like, you have to start literally burning down their city before you activate them. But like, so I totally agree. Like, he actually should, it was a really important moment for people who were despairing about the country to actually see someone go out and do something like that. But he shouldn't have, but he was a kid, and nothing about what he did, like that courage, as commendable as it was, meant that he was going to be a good conservative thought leader. Like, they were completely different characteristics. And we found out pretty soon that he wasn't a good conservative thought leader, right? Like I tweeted this like a year ago. Like the kid should have been allowed to ride off into the sunset. We should have found a way to give him a bunch of money. Like I guess he's got a girlfriend now. I don't know what her deal is. Give him a sinecure. He'd be set. Like he deserves all of that and much more. But elevating him to like this guy that goes and speaks on college campuses and is a representative of TPUSA or whatever conservative org was a mistake, because we found out pretty soon, and this is not like trying to be mean to him, that like he wasn't good at that. Like he's not particularly articulate. He hasn't thought through political ideas at a very deep level. That's fine. Like I'm better at that than he is. He's better at like shooting pedophiles,
removing communists. Yeah,
exactly.
Physically removing communists. Yeah.
So, anyways, I'm kind of ranting, but the point is like he is a man that deserves a lot of praise for the thing that made him famous. And he should have been allowed to ride off into the sunset. And it is a tragedy that the people around him didn't allow him to do that or didn't give him the advice to do that. And the result is you get like, debacles like this, which is just clown shows. He says something stupid, people get too mad about it, etc.
Yeah, there's this impulse for the right every time they find someone who agrees with them or someone who does something impressive to be like, oh, you're a musician. Oh, you're a like college athlete or something, but you happen to be right wing. Well, now you're basically like living on this press tour. You're a media personality, and all you do is basically go to like the right wing version of Comic-Cons and give little speeches and sign pictures and stuff. There's this weird obsession where the only thing to do, the only way to kind of reward someone who does something heroic or something noteworthy is to like shove them into a media personality space, which is just not what the vast majority of people actually want to do or are good at. And that's okay. Like, actually, we need a lot more people who are good at what Kyle Rittenhouse does than what we do. But and then when you do this, you put a guy like Rittenhouse in front of people. Eventually, he ends up getting manipulated. He gets end up being drawn into something like this. And like I said, ultimately, the whole point of talk about this was mainly to tell people, chill out. Okay, the guy has done more good on the earth than most people will ever do. Let him just have his life. Like you said, better for him to kind of ride off into the sunset than anything else. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was a piece that you wrote recently, and it has been a topic of conversation. We talked about having this discussion a little bit ago, and so since then, there's been a couple of different people who have had similar discussions, but I think it's worth still getting into. Both Matt Walsh and Steve Deace have talked about kind of the Republican obsession with winning the black vote. The black vote is the holy grail. Once you win the black vote, the skies will open, you'll be transformed. It's a spiritual revelation that will completely go ahead and remake the United States. That's all that matters. And their strategy to do this is the worst strategy possible, which is, the brothers are going to flip, right? That's Steve Deace always makes that joke, like the brothers be flipping narrative is always attached to this idea that if you can just do criminal justice reform, if you would just let more people out of jail, and you maybe you could even paint Kamala Harris as this evil cop who has been jailing black men, that is what is going to win over this like deified voting bloc and suddenly bring in the Republican Revolution. Like I said, you went into a lot more depth on this, but what is the fallacy here? What are the attacks that they're trying to make, and why are they doomed to fail?
Yeah, I saw this guy. I think he's doing good work, so I don't want to like attack him by name. Some people who saw the tweet know what I'm talking about, but he's doing like voter outreach, and he has this long tweet about how he's making inroads in like the state prisons, and he's like, we're winning the felon vote. It's like, what, dude? Why? Why are we courting the felon vote? It is this allergic reaction to courting the real mass political constituency that still does exist for the GOP and for right-wing politics, to the tune of tens of millions of voting eligible, non-college educated whites disproportionately concentrated in swing states, in the places where Republicans or anyone needs to win to get to an electoral college majority, where honestly, if we turned out a fraction of them, not only would we have an electoral college landslide, we'd have a popular majority. Like a popular majority for the right still exists in this country. But they're notoriously difficult to turn out. Part of the reason they're notoriously difficult to turn out is the Republican Party never really prioritizes turning them out.
Right.
The last time they turned out en masse was like Ralph Nader in the 90s, right? And Trump turned out a tiny fraction of this low propensity voter base in 2016 and won, right? And he made inroads with every single demographic except for white men in 2020, which is where he lost ground, and he lost. You put aside like the fraud and electioneering, which is obviously a real issue, but it's also true that I think he got talked into by some people who were idiots into thinking that, there's rumors that like Jared Kushner told him that if he passed the First Step Act, he'd win the black vote, right? Totally ridiculous to anyone who like knows the first thing about politics.
Come on, man, I've seen the Platinum Plan.
Exactly.
Right.
The next Lil Wayne, endorsement is really going to bring it home. But like you did have this absurd scenario where Trump would go do these rallies in like 98% white counties in Wisconsin and spend 30 minutes talking about the black unemployment rate. And it's like, these people don't care because you're not speaking to them. You're speaking to a demographic that, it's not like they hate black people or whatever, but you're not talking to them anymore. You were talking to them in 2016 and you were speaking for them, which is why they love you.
If he showed up to a black church, he wouldn't be talking about unemployment in, in the whitest county in Alabama.
Exactly. And you see this. I mean, this is like another example of why how Republicans have internalized all these left-wing premises. There's all kinds of standards that can be applied to every single group of people except for white people. White people are denied the same basic standards, the same basic rights in some sense that every other group of people has. So Republican voters, Matt Walsh, who's like surprisingly right-wing these days for a Daily Wire commentary, he's been putting out a lot of really interesting stuff, was making the point. He's like, Republicans pander until the cows come home to Hispanics and blacks and, et cetera, XYZ. They even like pander to gays now, depending on the Republican you're talking about. But they'll never, make an appeal to the people who make up 85 to 90% of their voter base, which is white people, right? Because they hate the idea that like too many white people like them. That like is embarrassing to them because they've internalized these left-wing premises. But the quintessential example again of this internalization of these left-wing premises is the fact that it's specifically the black vote, the most loyal Democratic constituency in America, that Republicans are desperate to win. Like if they wanted to diversify the party, it would make a lot more sense to go after Hispanics, because at least a third of Hispanics vote Republican, and like maybe more of them are swayable. And they do make some outreach to Hispanics, but they're obsessed with the black vote because the Democratic Party, like their entire political worldview and orientation is organized around what's good for black people, right? Like black people, it's ethnocentrism at its like most absurd and extreme. And obviously Democratic Party sort of apparatchiks and appendages like, the media, et cetera, do the same thing, where really when we talk about race, when we talk about minorities, we're really talking about black people. And, Hispanics are like a corollary to that. And therefore every policy, education, crime, taxes, whatever, has to be viewed first and foremost through the lens of how it affects black people. And a lot of Republicans basically agree with that, even if they don't fully understand it in those terms, which is why they commit political self-immolation all the time and like lose elections and embrace these strategies that cause them to lose elections in order to try to prove that they're not racist and to try to embrace these left-wing premises. It's never going to work, and it's extremely depressing that they're trying to do this for the millionth time.
Yeah, and the way, again, that they try to do it is the most comical thing at all. Right. If you were going to target that community, there are plenty of things that you already talk about that are significant impact. The fact that, wide-scale illegal immigration comes in, does a lot of damage to wages inside the band that a lot of African-American communities exist in. The fact that the delusion of the American makeup into kind of this polity of many different minorities means that African Americans lose their status as, kind of the primary interlocutor with what was mainly a European nation as the minority that most needed to find some kind of reconciliation. Instead, they just become one of many minorities, all of which are being victimized by white people. It loses all of the actual political power while giving this kind of perfunctory layer of political preference over everything that they do. but as long as they keep getting this kind of lip service to it, they continue to go on. But like you said in the article, the one that is most hilarious is the one in which Republicans think that if they can just attack Kamala Harris for being a cop, she locked black men in jail, she was tough on crime. Well, don't worry, we're the ones who's gonna let all the criminals out of jail. We're gonna go ahead and release the rapists and the murderers because we're trying to win the black vote. Like, that's the logic. That routinely comes up. We've already seen this over and over again. Trump, used this language. We're seeing it get recirculated again into the current campaign. It should be insulting, but more importantly, it's just wildly ineffective.
It's worse than wildly ineffective. It's self-destructive. Like, I mean, I made this point in the article. Crime, and specifically being tough on crime, other than the economy, has been the GOP's strongest issue for decades, going back to Nixon, right? Like, the Democrats' biggest weakness, depending how you measure it, and depending on the election cycle, but as a general trend, is being soft on crime. This is what, Clinton was famous for triangulation, because he basically cordoned off momentarily that vulnerability by like shifting his party to the right on crime. Now progressives hate him for that, but it was extraordinarily politically effective, because that was the Democrats' biggest political weakness, was the fact they were seen totally correctly as being pro-criminal, as being too soft on crime, as not being willing to enforce our laws. And that was Republicans' most effective line of attack against them, was that they were these things. So it's not just not effective, like you're not going to win many more black voters doing that kind of stuff, or you're not going to win any black voters who weren't already going to vote for you, at least. It's neutering arguably the single most effective political line of attack against Kamala. And when you point this out, you get these people who are saying like, there's a difference between being, tough on crime and what Kamala did, which is keeping, black men in prison past their sentence to use for slave labor, right? Which is like, echoing like 6 different left-wing tropes in one sentence. Or they'll say, we can make distinctions between what she did and what we want to do. It's kind of tough on crime. It's like what you're talking about earlier. That's not how mass politics works, right? Like, yeah, you could maybe, I still don't buy it, but you can maybe make this like fine-tuned intellectual argument where you're drawing these nuanced distinctions between your version of tough on crime and how she went too far. That's not the message that like a normal voter receives. It's either Kamala is too tough on crime or she's too soft on crime. Either Republicans are going to be tougher on crime than Kamala or less tough on crime than Kamala. You have to choose one. You should go with the one that actually works, right? That actually turns out your voters, that appeals to people, that makes her less appealing. And at least some people on the right are like running the opposite direction, which is mind-boggling.
All right. Well, we're going to head over to the questions of people. Did you said you have enough time to stick around?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right. So before we do go to the questions of people, Nate, can you let people know where to find your work?
Yeah, I post everything I write on my Twitter at NJ Hochman, NJHOCHMAN. So go follow me there.
All right. We've got Glow in the Dark here. He says, will we get an answer? What is a woman from the left? No, not anytime soon. It's whatever is politically convenient, to be very clear. Let's see. Glow in the Dark, man, you got quite a few questions here. It says, Plato says woman is a featherless biped. Dionysus holds up the featherless chicken. Behold, a woman. We're basically having this argument in infinitum. Yes. Glow in the Dark. We couldn't get Democrats are the real racists. We should say we wish one day to be as racist as the Democrats. Turn the statement on its head.
Disavow, formally disavow.
Trying to frame it as an aspirational, sir. How could you? How could you? As a joke, he follows. There Minecraft. We go. All right. Yes. In Minecraft. He says, fundamentally, we need to lead the conversation, not to be led by the conversation. You lose the argument that way. Dems usually lay down arguments a decade in advance and then back it up with studies. Yeah, that's exactly right. Nothing frames this more than I haven't had time to rant about this yet, so I'm going to take a moment now. Excuse me, Nate. So the JD Vance is weird debate is the stupidest thing I have ever seen conservative media fall for. JD Vance is weird. Seriously, guys, that's what you bid on? That's what you bid on. Donald Trump was shot in the face. Shot in the face. Leftists drove a crazy person to try to kill Donald Trump, and they're going to keep doing that. They have been talking still about how he's Hitler, about how he's an existential threat to democracy, how he's the end of the United States as we know it. They've been doing this the entire time. They have manufactured an entire media apparatus with no other job than basically to tell left-wing radicals, hey, Donald Trump sure would be sad if something happened to him. Get rid of this meddlesome priest. Won't someone deal with this meddlesome priest, right? Like, that has been the message from the media forever. There's a failure by the Secret Service so phenomenal, so colossal, that it is just unprecedented in history, where you have some guy randomly wandering around the rooftop in view of everyone with people screaming, don't let him in there, he's got a gun. As he walked up with a ladder and stuff to get in here in a full rifle kit, he takes a shot at a president who's completely unguarded basically by a Secret Service detail filled with 5'2" women. This happens. And then they go to Congress and they lie directly. The Secret Service and the FBI perjure themselves repeatedly and provably in front of the whole country. And you let the left shift the narrative on JD Vance is weird. Seriously, how are people so bad at this? How are people so terrible at what they do? It's very simple. The left had the worst couple weeks you could imagine. The vice president had to be cooed into running for president because the current sitting president was so obviously not the president, so completely senile, that you replaced it with Kamala Harris, the least charismatic human being of all time, after the failed assassination tip of a man who popped up and immediately started chanting, fight, fight, with blood streaking from his face with an American flag flying behind him. And you gave all of that up, all of that momentum. People were talking about how this was going to be like a Nixon-style blowout, right? Like a complete Reagan-style domination. And you gave all that up to talk and defend yourself against J.D. Vance's weird...
Dude,
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Just really quickly, that is the perfect example. I work in conservative media, but conservative media is basically the handmaiden of regime media. All they do is respond to regime media. That's all they do. So regime media wanted to be done talking about the Trump assassination. So conservative media was done talking about the Trump assassination. Regime media wanted to talk about how JD Vance is weird. So conservative media is talking about how JD Vance is weird. There is no even interest in creating an independent narrative of the ones that regime media wants to create. And that's, the JD Vance is weird stuff is, the textbook perfect example of that. So
just blows my mind. Just blows my mind. I was teaching high school 2 years ago, guys. You should be better at this than me. You're professionals. What are you doing? So bad. It's so painfully bad. It's so bad. Okay. Sorry. Robert Weinsfeld says, is leftism just the deconstruction of unchosen bonds? To a large percentage, yes. I think Charles Haywood's description of the Enlightenment as kind of the dismantling of all bonds not continuously chosen is a pretty good explanation. Leftism is a wider deconstruction. You could talk about different periods historically. In the American context, it's most certainly a deconstruction of the Anglo-Protestant identity, the Christian identity, the larger project of Christendom, the idea of any kind of scientific norms. It's all of these things, right? All of this is wrapped up in there, but that's not a bad first step in explaining it. Sergeant Hodel says, let's be honest, a women boxing period is a clown world and gay. Yeah, I mean, it would not be what I would encourage any female to, female sports, absolutely. But, combat sports.
If I have a daughter, she's not going to be boxing, whether she's boxing against women or men,
Yeah.
It's not going to be done.
Maybe, sending women out to go get your faces beaten and, their eyes fractured and nose fractured is not the way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Cribber says, completely unrelated to the topic, have you guys seen Longlegs has a subtle and surprising anti-trans message. It's also really good. I guess that's a movie, but no, I have not seen it. Sorry. I've now reached the age where most of my movie consumption is westerns that were made many decades ago. I'm officially that guy, but try to catch a new one every once in a while here. Let's see. Jose Velasquez says, "Hey guys, do you think Vance has become more of a liability to the campaign, like the guy, but the media's smear campaign has been taken to 11? Thanks." Yeah, that was probably before I started screaming. But thank you, Jose. Look, Vance is not there to be this candidate for the left. Like, of course the left hate him. Of course they do. Like, this guy represents the part of the country that they hate, the people of the country that they hate. And Vance is not chosen because he was not chosen to be this. He's not. Some vice presidents are picked to fill out some kind of weakness, some demographic weakness. Mike Pence was chosen to fill out Trump's weakness with evangelical Christians, even though now evangelical Christians love Trump way more than they love Mike Pence. They hate Mike Pence. But that is one thing that a vice president can do. But then you also have like a Dick Cheney vice president who is more like a policy guy or just an assassination insurance guy, right? Like, if you get rid of this guy, here's the guy standing behind him. And from what I've heard, Trump made the decision post being shot that Vance was not the choice. Maybe, I don't have all the information, but that is what I have heard. And that, I think, makes sense to me. Ultimately, I think Vance is the choice when you want to make sure that people know that there's someone behind you who's young, hungry, and has the interests of the movement. So removing Donald Trump does not remove your problem.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think obviously Vance of all the plausible picks was ideologically the best. Like, it's not even close, right? So for that reason, people of our ideological persuasion should be overjoyed that he was picked. People are right that the media would do this to whoever Trump picked as VP, obviously. It's also true that and this is no hate on Vance, that he gives them more to work with than a totally anodyne, inoffensive Republican. Especially a few years ago when he was kind of emerging on the scene as a new right, thought leader or whatever. He was out there. He was a little edgy. He was definitely
he's a poster. He's a
poster. He was a poster. Even as senator, he was a little bit, right? But the childless cat ladies, I think that's the tip of the iceberg. I don't like giving anyone any ideas about where to look, but he was saying some stuff that was clearly signaling at a particular worldview that you're definitely not totally allowed to hold. And we love that, but obviously it gives the media a lot of scandal that they can kind of continually generate that you wouldn't get with Doug Burgum or something, right? So it is true they would do this to anyone. They are able to do it maybe to a higher or greater extent with Vance. But descending into hysterics about it is totally useless. So
the media machine is going to churn no matter what. They need. It also helps that they had a hard time attacking Trump for a little while. Because of everything that happened. And so Vance became the easy target.
Yeah, exactly.
But if it had been Marco Rubio, they would have been pulling up something about Rubio as well.
Yeah.
Glow in the Dark says, Dim's trained the rep need to reset mentally. Train which representative, I guess. Maybe.
Oh, the Republicans?
I guess, that could be the case. Yeah, okay. Baloo says, well done. I like the tailspin reference. That's my childhood there. Kitchen Nightmares, but it's Auron going around to various conservative media organizations. Yeah, seriously. This is terrible. Just knocking their tumblers out of their hand, not knocking their branded coffee mugs off the table.
Tears.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Creeper Weirdo, normies, he's not weird, Auron. They shot at him. Yes, yeah, precisely the case. That is what I am trying to say. All right, guys. Well, we got one more. Creeper Weirdo again. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it, guys. We could run Jesus Christ with Fred Rogers as VP, and they would still hate you. Stop claiming otherwise. That's all there is to it. That's better political wisdom than you'll get from 90% of pundits, unfortunately. But that's exactly right.
Jesus Christ with Fred Rogers. Yeah, I would take it.
Yeah, I mean, they would probably find deep things to hate there. But yeah.
Yeah.
but yeah. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. But, of course, make sure you're checking out all of Nate's stuff. Always great to have him on. If it's your first time on this channel, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube. Make sure you go ahead and also click the notifications and the bell so that you can find these when they go live. Otherwise, YouTube's like, yeah, you're subscribed to this guy, but do you really want to watch anything that they put out? That seems ridiculous. Make sure that if you want to hear these broadcasts as podcasts, you subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can do that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books in a Million, or at your favorite local bookstore. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.